Now, we plunge in here at, in some ways, a very dense part of this afternoon. I promise you, it will not go heavier than this, right? I promise you. But I did really feel that it was important to get into a fair bit of where Spinoza could be a worthwhile philosopher to get into. So, Spinoza's monism. You have dualism, we have mind and matter. Monism says there's only one substance. You could be, like Spinoza, somebody who's open to a spiritual view. You could be, like Karl Marx, a materialist, and say, there's just matter, end of. Right? So, Spinoza is a monist, and this concept, Deus sive natura, God or nature, I want to leave with you as a thought. Wherever you are on any spiritual spectrum, I think that looking at things the way that Derek Spinoza did is a worthwhile thing to do. And that, as I say, well, most of you know that I am a committed Christian. I find looking at Spinoza's philosophy very helpful and fruitful for me. The next thing, again, this is Latin, but not just to be learned, but because, in a sense, it's very hard to translate. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to think of what you understand by natura naturans. Nature naturing, nature doing its own thing. Nature, also I am told, it can be nature nurturing. All right? So it's a very deep concept, natura naturans. And I always thought it was Spinoza who came up with it, but apparently not. Now, I don't know exactly where, but it's used by the scholastic philosophers, the ones who were basically monks, the church philosophers of the Middle Ages. But anyway, now, this is the one that we've talked about quite a bit. The order and connection of ideas is the same as the order and connection of things. Now, I'm saying an elegant assumption, right? Because if you said to Baruch Spinoza, okay, this sounds so good, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if that's the way things are? Only, can you give me an example of this, please? And I think he might have, I don't know what Spinoza would have said, but this is the weak point philosophically in Spinoza, right? That the whole thing hangs together beautifully. It's elegant, but this is an assumption, and when it comes down to understanding it completely or proving it, difficult. We looked at this one, the next one, the mind and the body are the same thing, conceived now under the attribute of thought, and now under the attribute of extension. Now for me, I can go with that. For me, that is helpful. I leave you, when you get the PowerPoint, to ponder that. And this final quote from Spinoza, the true is simply and solely the one substance whose attributes are thought and extension or nature. Only this is absolute unity, is reality. It alone is God. So basically, Spinoza is saying, God is everything, everything is God. Now, you may feel that is helpful, you may feel that's not saying anything very much. A bit like, say, when daughter comes down in the morning with a face like a smack bottom, and you say, what's the matter? Nothing. Come on, tell us, what's the matter? Everything! Right? You may feel it. She's smiling at me over there. That's Nicola. You remember? Yeah. But, so maybe Spinoza is not telling us an awful lot. But it could be, yes?
Can I ask you, have you heard of the Collat's conjecture?
Tell me.
It's a mathematical equation it's 421, which adds up to 7. And I've been studying God maths recently. It's very interesting. But 421, no mathematician can solve the problem. And they're saying that the 1 is us, or goes back to God. It's really interesting.
Right, okay, maths is a fascinating subject, isn't it? Yes. Let's move on now to where you get involved. All right? Now, we've talked about this concept of natura naturans, and we've talked about it a little bit. I'd like us to take perhaps just 30 seconds and consider, when we talk about nature, naturing, or doing its own thing, or nurturing, what comes to mind? So just 30 seconds reflection, and then we'll take it further.
So it's everything that, when things die, they feed into...
Yeah, but you're spoiling it for these people. They could have come up with that, you see. It'll come up later on, yeah. But yeah, after 30 seconds. Is that all right? Right, now, if I was really clever with PowerPoint, I would have had this disclosing as it went through, but I'm not too good with it. And in any case, this one's a little bit unpredictable. So, there it is, Richard.
Yeah.
Decomposition and growth.
Yeah.
Now, if you had in your reaction something like seasons and cycles, would you raise your hand, please? Right, a few people. Next one down. Processes within the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms. What do I mean by that? Reproduction. Well, that's in the first one, isn't it? What do I mean? I can't remember what I meant by it. Well, let's go to the next one. The periodic table of elements. Did anybody have that? You sort of waved a hand slightly.
Well, I know what it means.
Yeah, but was it, when you talk about nature doing its thing?
What's all nature? The elements, aren't they?
Yeah, but nature doing its thing with the periodic table of elements is that all this stuff that's going, you know, it organises itself into stuff that's got is it proton going around the nucleus, and stuff that's got 8 going around the nucleus, and so on. It organises, that's nature doing its thing, and the periodic table. Quantum mechanics, anybody?
Quantum field theory?
Woohoo! Heavy trip. Yes indeed. Processes of cosmology. Yeah, right. Galaxies, planets forming, stars forming. Here's the big one. Did anybody feel that they saw themselves as part of natura naturans? Raise your hand if you did. Wow, go to the top of the class, but don't fall off. Right? Now that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so we've got a lot of dualists here. None the worse for that. But yeah, if you didn't naturally think of yourself as part of natura naturans, that would indicate you tend to think in terms of mind and matter, in terms of human, non-human, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with it. But just to say, this is self-knowledge, isn't it? So yes, please.
I didn't think of any of them.
Oh, great!
I
Yes.
was asked that question when I was studying psychology, and obviously you have to decide what you feel as you study. But on a more personal level, so I was adopted. I found my mother's side of the family, and we all seem to do the same thing. We, for instance, we were sitting around the table when I first met them. We actually all like the same drink. We like this, we like that. We had there was elements about us, and yet I wasn't brought up with them.
Yes.
Now I discovered my father's side of the family last year. The second part was that I would be meeting in 2 weeks' time. But the first part that I met, again, there is this element, even fault-wise, and also to most of us have either gone into law, medical, and so on and so on. And so I see that as more of a nature side, where we've inherited our genes and our genes
Right,
dictate
I'm with you,
what
yes.
we are.
Yes, thank you. Right, so yes, the outworking of genetic inheritance.
Yes.
Thank you, all right? You see, we learn something every day.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to skip this one, because you can see it on the PowerPoint. I'm going to skip that one too, and get to David Hume. All right? And we've got half an hour, and this is nice. Now for something completely different. Okay, David Hume, Scots philosopher, and very, very well known for writing beautiful, clear prose. We were talking over here, Richard and others, about Hegel, and very, very difficult it is to understand. Well, David Hume is clarity itself. And one of the things I want to talk about today is what is known as Hume's fork. If you have encountered Hume's fork already, would you wave a hand? I think one or two people have. Okay. How many prongs does Hume's fork have? 2. That's right. Like the fork that in the higher class of fish and chip shop they will offer you. When I was teaching secondary, I used to use one of those for illustrating Hume's fork. But this is a very, very helpful way of thinking. Now, this can be used in so many different situations. Now, the way that Hume describes these two kinds of thinking is relations of ideas and matters of fact. And if somebody says something and you're not sure about it, the first thing that I do is, I think in terms of Hume's fork. Is this just something that's a relations of ideas thing, or is it matter of fact? And then that helps you focus on the way you need to think in terms of relating to this idea. Let's have a look at this then. Relations of ideas. If A is greater than B, and B is greater than C, then A must be greater than C. All right? Those of you who are into standard logic and so on, that's good, comfortable stuff. All right? If you can't see the screen and you need that again, wave a hand, please. Okay, we're all happy with that one? Now says Hume, the contrary isn't true, but could not be true. And it could not make sense. We could not say in that circumstance, A is smaller than C. It just could not be. All right? So if...
It's not true of football results, for instance.
Very true, but then they are matters of fact. You see, this is the thing. This is where the fork is so helpful in terms of clear thinking. So, yeah, that contradiction is the test for Hume. If something could be contradicted, and if you contradict something and it doesn't make sense and it couldn't possibly make sense, you know it's to do with relations of ideas. And then, in terms of dealing with it, you deal with it in certain ways. But there are matters of fact. So Charles III is King of England is true. But if you think, could you contradict that? You could. It could be true. That he could have dropped dead this afternoon before any of us knew about it. It would make sense. It's not impossible in the way that the relations of ideas one is. So a very, very simple test for these two different kinds of thinking is the issue of contradiction. Now, I
That is a
just...
contradiction.
Sorry?
That is a contradiction in itself, because if you have like Queen Elizabeth II,
Yes.
when her father died, they wouldn't have said, "Long live the king." would
Very,
they?
very true. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, yes, I agree, yes. Yeah, but this is the one that I promise you, this is a genuine instance. That in the 20th century, when I was teaching secondary most of the time, the standard textbook example on this was, for relations of ideas, all bachelors are male. Right? In other words, and the way I would teach it would be to say, look, if somebody is a bachelor, and they say and somebody's a bachelor, you don't need to take them in the changing rooms and check them out,
Or change sex.
Well, this is the thing, you see, that you wouldn't find that in a 21st century textbook on Hume, that you wouldn't use that example these days. Interesting.
Even without sex change, there are a lot of women who are bachelors of science. So
Very, very true, yes, very true. But this is an interesting element, I'm going to say, of the 2020s. But without getting into anything too controversial, especially at 10 to 4, but I'll leave that one with you. Hume's Fork, I think that is one of the gems of philosophy. Right, I'll just read you Hume's actual words. All the objects of human reason or inquiry may naturally be divided into two kinds, to wit, relations of ideas and matters of fact. Of the first kind are the sciences of geometry, algebra and arithmetic, which are discoverable by the mere operation of thought. Matters of fact, which are the second object of human reason, are not ascertained in the same manner, nor is our evidence of their truth, however great, of a like nature with the foregoing. Beautifully put. Now, this is where we get into two guys who I alluded to at the very beginning when I talked about philosophy of the will. Okay? Now, this is very much a modern element in philosophy, and don't want to spend too long on the history of it, but philosophy of the will is extremely interesting, extremely powerful in terms of offering us understanding of life. And, well, the two people I've chosen for it are Marx and Camus, but let's just look at a brief bit of the history of it. Now, Blaise Pascal, who was contemporary of Descartes and Spinoza, he started it with a thing called the wager. Now, we'll go into the detail of the wager because many people have discussed it in lots of detail, and we'd be here all afternoon. But basically, Pascal, in this section, is saying, is it better to wager on God and virtue or on no God and hedonism? Right? And this is just in the beginnings of the development of probability in statistics, in maths. And Pascal was at the front of that. And basically, he comes down to an argument that says, it's a truth table with four possibilities, sort of yes, no, true, false. And Pascal says, so it's better to bet on God. But the person he's talking to says, but I don't want to make that kind of choice. To which Pascal says, with deep understanding, too bad, you're on board. Vous êtes embarqué in French. A tremendous understanding. You are in life, whether you like it or not. And you are a choosing being. And there ain't no way out of that. Now that understanding is the basis of so much philosophy of will, that we're choosing beings. Various people, Nietzsche, who we won't go into today, he says the world is the will to power, nothing besides.
Oh, he was very creative. From psychological point of view, he said marriages divorce, not because they stopped to laugh, but they didn't build up friendship.
Yeah, right.
Very creative.
Yeah,
man.
yeah, says, don't try to understand the world. People have tried to understand the world. The point is to change the world. Why should it stay the same as it is to understand? Engels, Marx's buddy, the sword of enthusiasm is just as good as the sword of genius. So change the world. If you don't even understand the world, well, why bother? Why not change it into something you do understand?
Well, can I just come in there? It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's all right.
Because there's a lot of people that want to change the world, but not change it in a very positive way. But they actually think that they are doing a positive
Yes.
because this affects this, and this is how we want it to be.
Yes, indeed.
So what does that say?
Sorry?
What philosophy would say that?
You people could pick up
That's
Nietzsche.
contradictory.
Yeah, people would pick up Nietzsche and say, this is what Nietzsche says. And a certain gentleman in the 30s
Yeah.
in Germany
Yeah.
was a big fan of Nietzsche.
He was. Yeah.
This is not to do down the ethical side of Nietzsche, but you can certainly interpret him that way. And then you're starting on ending on a happy point. We'll get to Camus later on. We must imagine Sisyphus, who was somebody who was condemned because he upset the gods. I don't know what he did to upset the gods, but it was quite easy to. Some of them upset real easy, and his punishment was to push a stone off a mountain, and he had to do that. He couldn't die until he'd done this. And he had to push it up to the top of a mountain and get it to the top, but it would always fall out of his hands, go down to the bottom. He had to start again. And for Camus, that was a myth that expressed the absurdity of the human condition. That whatever you try to do, it all goes in the end, and there's no way you should live or way that's right and wrong. It's just absurd, but we must imagine that Sisyphus is happy. More on Camus, but first of all Karl Marx, who famously said, I am not a Marxist. But that's by the way. Here's a nice little poster for us. Philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Now that was a bit radical, but Marx was no fool. You might not agree with him, but he was not a fool. And we were talking about Marx and Hegel, weren't we? And he took a lot from Hegel, a lot about the contradiction. In other words, the world is this way, you change it, you contradict it, right? So contradiction is very much there in Marx.
Yes, but you can introduce. Marx wanted to introduce as well. He looked at people that were in prison and so forth and so forth. So he felt that you could introduce better conditions, that you could introduce better working conditions and so forth.
Yeah. There's a very moral side to Marx,
Yeah.
but time is running on. Change is at the root of dialectical change and tension. Remember the bow and the lyre, right? That having everything nice and neat, this follows from that, A plus B equals 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's fine and dandy, but that isn't the only way that the world works. It's not the only way that life works. So, what we see in Marx is the law of the unity and conflict of opposites. Now, we won't go into that in detail, but you've got the bow and the lyre in Heraclitus. I'm not saying he took it from Heraclitus, but he probably took it from Hegel. I think Hegel probably took it from Heraclitus. Now, the law of the passage of quantitative changes into qualitative changes. So, you have water at sort of room temperature, it's a liquid. Go below 0 centigrade, it's a solid. Over 100 centigrade, and it's steam. There are qualitative changes that come just because you've increased the number. Now, this is taking change as part of your mindset, rather than, well, there's this and there's that, and we divide the world up into this and that, and this is the right order and so on. No, recognise change. Another quantitative into qualitative, population increases, and so the working class develops, because there's so many people and not enough to go round, and things get divided in different ways. And this is the law of the negation of the negation. We'll look at an instance of that in just a minute, but this again is crucial to dialectical thinking. Right, here's an example straight from Marx. The capitalist mode of appropriation, getting hold of stuff, right? The result of the capitalist mode of production, get a factory, workers working for you, you own the means of production, produces capitalist private property. So you've got, rather than what I was told in Sunday school, the earth is the Lord's, or that common land and so on, it's now being taken by a small group of powerful people. So individual private property is negated, right? So that's a negation. But, says Marx, capitalist production begets, with the inexorability of a law of nature, its own negation. In other words, capitalist production brings about discontent among workers, unionisation, collective bargaining, and so on. And so the power of those who own the means of production is challenged.
Like Animal Farm.
Sorry?
Animal Farm.
Well, look at this one.
Oh, right. Okay.
Great minds, eh? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Look, this is interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. So, this is my summary. History is driven by material conditions and class struggle. Remember, Marx is a materialist, all right? Societal change is a result of contradictions between economic forces and social relations resolved through revolutionary transformation. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Bolsheviks, Lenin and company. Capitalism contains inherent conflicts, leading ultimately to its overthrow and a class of society. That's what Marx believed. And as I forgot, didn't you get your name? Your name is Celia. As Celia said, but Animal Farm. Okay, nearly there. It's 4 o'clock. Albert Camus. Looks like a worried man. How many people have actually read any Albert Camus? Raise your hand if you would, please. A few people. Now, his novels are well worth reading, especially the shorter ones. Yeah. One of the things I sometimes think negatively about my secondary school, but there was a teacher there, an English teacher, and he said to me, there's this French novel that's come out, you've got to read it. And it was by Camus, it was The Plague. And I read it and I thought, this is different. but yeah, Camus novels, but also he's a much nicer guy than Jean-Paul Sartre, though Sartre was probably cleverer. All right. Only one important philosophical question. Faut-il se suicider ou non? Should you commit suicide or not? That's not too difficult to get his head round, is it? Unlike, say, Sartre and some of his stuff. But that's by the way. Now, my disclaimer. Camus says non, but not everyone finds his reasoning convincing, and it is true. Some people have studied existentialism and decided that suicide was the only way. So where do you start from? Well, says Camus, you start from what you know, from the absurd, right? That we know that life is meaningless. How do we know? Not because we have figured it all out or whatever. No, we have a gut feeling. And one of Sartre's novels is called Nausea, right? And you know because, right? It's not an intellectual argument, but for Camus and Sartre, and remember, they had gone through the Second World War in France, and they'd gone through the occupation, and that was not a barrel of laughs. So to believe in the absurd in the 50s was not difficult at all. Now, Camus defines the absurd. He says it's born of the confrontation between human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. All right? But the positive from Camus is the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This is from the book The Myth of Sisyphus, which is a series of essays, and it is really easy reading. I say easy reading, easy understanding. Easy reading, maybe not. So, what's Camus' argument? If everything is absurd, why go on living? Well, says Camus, in a meaningless world, there is no obligation to do one thing rather than another. Okay? Pretty straightforward. There is no escape from choosing. Pascal, remember, vous êtes embarqué, you're on board. No escape. If you say, oh, well, I'm gonna live my life by flipping a coin. Yeah, do that. But that's a choice. No, yeah. Oh, well, yes, I'll kill myself. That's a choice. Right? There's no way, absolutely no way out of choosing. So since we are choosing beings, let our choices be our choices. Let them be authentic. Let them be what we have decided, not what our parents said, or what the crowd is saying, or what we think people will want us to say. No, we're a choosing being. Be yourself. Be authentic. And that I take as being one of the really great messages of the existentialists. And I really enjoyed actually teaching this to teenagers when I was a secondary teacher. That I felt this was something that they were going to get really get something from. And seeing some of them who have taken that issue of being authentic, of making their personal decisions and going with them, that's been one of the rewarding things about having been a teacher at one stage. All right. You don't go for conformity or non-being. You're not going to be like a stone that's being rolled down the hill by a stream. You are a choosing being. You're going to choose. But there's no right way to choose. A social activist could just as well have chosen to run a betting shop. But if they each own their choice, and that's commitment, engagement is the French word, they can find authentic meaning in it. So, says Camus, il faut imaginer Sisyphe heureux. We must imagine Sisyphus as being happy. Maybe a tall order, yes?
Just to complicate matters. But not choosing is a choice.
So not choosing is a choice.
Is a choice.
Yes. Yes. Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, but
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no way out. Right? Yeah, no way out. Okay.
We are in control.
Yeah.
It's our destiny. Whatever we do, it's up to us.
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
my experience,
Sorry?
from my experience, people often create absurds in their life.
Yes. 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 Oh, yes. Yes. Yes, indeed. Yeah. And it must be said, actually, about Camus. He died in a road accident. There are conspiracy theories about it, but Camus himself said that the most absurd way to die is in a road accident. He was a lovely guy, a footballer, very, very nice guy. And, interestingly, a friend of mine sent me this book, Albert Camus and the Minister. Very interesting book. The guy who's the minister was the minister of the Protestant church of the American church in Paris. And Camus used to go, and he would sort of skulk in at the beginning and walk out because he didn't want to be recognised. But Camus used to go to the American church in Paris. Anyway, we've got 5 minutes, a bit more than 5 minutes, for our wind down. And this is where it would be lovely if everybody here felt they could say, well, this is what I'm taking away. No, you mustn't say too much because otherwise we're going to run out of time. But it would be lovely if we could just say what we're taking away from this afternoon, because that will be helpful to everybody. And it'll encourage me too. Who's going to be first?
I thought it was very interesting, you know, that going all the way back, that philosopher
Heraclitus.
knew such a lot,
Yes.
you know, going
Yes.
all that
Yes,
way
yes,
back,
yes,
you know.
yes. Right.
And-
The continuity of it, that being human and being human fully joins us up to people across the ages, people across cultures. Yes? Somebody else? Yes, please.
Right, it's just a bit deep, but who was the person that created Christianity?
Well, that's a big question. I would say probably St. Paul.
And
Right.
I would say Mary Magdalene.
Okay,
'Cause
right,
she
yes, okay,
saw
yeah,
the
yeah.
Spirit and she
Yeah,
went
okay.
out and told
Right. Yeah,
everybody.
yeah, yeah.
And
Sorry,
from
what
that
was the
day
other
on,
Mary,
it's
Mary
very
Magdalene,
young.
by all means, follow this one through. There's plenty of stuff on the internet about it. Yes, please.
I just simply that this thing of there's been a lot that I agree with and some that completely confuse me. But the idea that we have to choose, we have in front of us, we have choices. If we don't choose, if we think we aren't choosing, we are still choosing.
Yes, exactly,
And
yes.
I think this is
Right,
fundamentally
okay.
very important.
Right, thank you.
And
Yeah.
making the right choices is
Right,
important.
thank you so much, yes.
I
Yes,
have
please.
a feeling we're in some kind of continuum, and that it's a closed circuit, right? Like the second law of thermodynamics, you can't destroy energy. So whatever you do, it will pop up somewhere else. There will be an equal and opposite reaction.
Right. Yes, thank you. There's some really interesting stuff on the internet on that in terms of what we might call the field of the quantum field of the subatomic particles and so on. That, relating what you said to that and how, if you like, the field recycles and also the field carries traces and marks. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like a memory. But whatever we do, we'll, as you say, will not. For instance, if you look at the wars today, a lot of them are to do with what British government did with hitting Israel and Gaza, with interfering
Yeah. Is it all right if we
with Russia.
hear from some other people as well? Give the other people a chance.
And
Is that all
so
right?
it's come back to bite us now, and
Yeah.
it will bite us big, I feel.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, please. Somebody twitch back there. Don't go to an auction sale. Yes, please.
In comparing quote to these old philosophers, which you talk about, now we are different people and we are looking at every issue and the world in wider
Yes,
spectrum.
yes.
Not
The
like
oh yes, the knowledge, the information that is out there. It is, well, it's mind blowing, really, isn't it? But we'll make the best we can of it. Yes, please. Yeah.
Well, I said to
Gary.
you earlier that if you go into Persia, Zoroastrianism, which actually Freddie Mercury was of Zoroastrianism, that faith actually relates to nature, is on their beliefs, which actually goes all through your presentation. That connection, like the gentleman said there about energy,
Yeah.
we're all interconnected in
Yes,
some
yes.
way. The thing is that we like to put labels. Depending on if we label this, we label that, and then depending on what we're exposed to, we tend to drive our beliefs.
But labels haven't been around that long. When I was studying criminology, it was an American psychologist that decided to put people in boxes, if you like.
Yeah. Is there somebody from sort of the people in the back row? You've been a bit quiet. Speak up. Yes.
We have a couple of philosophers there. They're very, very quiet.
Oh, really?
Privately, thank you very much for this A,
Right.
B, and C.
Right.
It was question on during my exam from
Oh, right.
logic. From
Yeah.
logic.
Come on, you philosophers. I think I know who you are, but I wouldn't mind knowing what you thought of the show so far.
But David, what I can't understand is that, you know, the choice that we're all the great people, we're all the philosophers, we're all the leaders. I mean, America had Biden, 80, 100 and something, and Trump, out of all these millions of people.
Yeah.
What's happening in the
Yeah.
world?
We were
That's
talking
all
about this in the break. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I know.
But I understand, and we've got Keir Starmer.
Right. Look, I think somebody's got to sort that car out. I think the world is trying to tell us something, and it might be that we've done ever so well this afternoon, and that it's probably getting near to the time to go home. But thank you for your responses.